Okay, I have a video already of 1F, 2, and 3, and this is 1A, B, C, D, E. Okay, let's start with 1A. When you determine y when x equals -2. Most people did okay with this one. Okay, and they're telling us over here when x is -2. So they're giving us a value for x. Whenever they give you a value, you could just plug in that value into the equation. So x is now not x anymore, but it becomes the -2. So if I were to rewrite it, y equals 5 minus 6 times, because I'm going to put in this -2 instead of the x. So according to my order of operations, I'm going to do the multiplication first. So -6 times -2 is positive 12. And that would be the 5 in front. That's still there, didn't go away. So you bring it down, then 5 plus 12 is 17. All right. So that's 1A. 1B, -8x plus 2 minus 3x equal -60. We're going to rearrange this equation and simplify it so that we can solve for x. So we will get an answer for x. All right, the first thing we want to do is start simplifying the equation. So that is, whenever you see this, you want to mess with that first. And of course, we can do the distributive property, -8 times x, and then the -8 times the positive 2. So -8 times x is -8x. The -8 times positive 2 is -16. This -3x stays in the equation, doesn't go anywhere. And neither does the -60. And write it all out, because it's easier to follow your own steps. Okay, so what we have here is two like terms, and we're going to combine them. We have -8 and -3x. And then we have a -16 right there. So we will rewrite this as -8x, just so that you can see it better. Move that one. And of course, always take the sign with the number. And we're going to move the -16 equals -60. I just rearranged things. So now I can combine those like terms easier. And you always add the opposite. So I'm adding two negatives and it becomes -11. If you have troubles with the integers, those kinds of problems will throw you off a little bit. Which is why I had you do some integer practice at the beginning. Alright, so we're writing out now how it's simplified. What we have to do now is isolate the x. So the first thing we do is take this number and we're going to try to get it over here. So we do that by, this is minus, so we add the opposite, well, we add 16 to both sides of the equation, because you have to do the same thing to each side of the equation. And that cancels out the 16. Minus 60 plus 16 is you find the difference, so it's 44, and take the sign of the larger number, so -44. So I'm just going to move this thing following along over here. We still have the -11x. That didn't go anywhere. We moved off the -16 to the other side, which then changed -60 to -44. So now in the end here, we're going to divide both sides by -11. And negative over negative is a positive. And that cancels to 1 because any number over itself, negative 11 over itself equals 1. That's just a fraction rule. Okay, so x then equals positive 4 because when we divide negative by a negative, you get a positive. All right, so that's that one. Let's look back over here. We're going to do number C. Okay, so on this one, you're going to want to simplify first. So any math that you can do before you start to move things around, you do. So on this side, you could combine all these terms because each term is a like term. That's a capital X. That's really just an accident. Anyway, so we can add minus 2 plus 4 minus 14. So let's do that. Minus 2 plus 4 equals 2. And then minus 14 equals minus 12. So I just worked with each of those coefficients. So that simplifies all these terms, because each one is a term, down to one term. So it's much more manageable. We have negative 12x. Remember, the x is still there. It doesn't go anywhere. And over here, of course, we can simplify that. That's just, math. So negative 10 plus 9 is negative 1. And then we subtract 5. And of course, you're going to add the opposite. So your total will be negative 6. Now, this is where a lot of people made an error. You're dividing by 12 on each side, so you don't get an answer of 2. You get an answer of 1/2. So here you have 12 over 12 is 1. 6 over 12 reduces, here's negative over negative, to a positive 1/2. Okay, that equals x. Because it's 6 divided by 12. Let's look at that on a calculator. And I think 6 divided by 12, whoops, 0.5. And of course we know that 0.5 as a decimal is 1/2. All right, we'll work with 1D now. So solve for x when, and it gets a little tricky when you have a fraction as a coefficient. And some people's computers didn't come out with this as a coefficient. So it came out 13, I think. So it threw off some people trying to do the calculation. So notice I said 1/3 x. The way you need to look at that is this 1/3 is a coefficient on the x. This is a coefficient, the 2. You always refer to a number that is next to the letter as a coefficient. All right. So 1/3 is a coefficient. It is not 1 over 3x. You don't want to write that. That's incorrect. Another way to look at that is 1/3 times x over 1. That's what that is, which gives you x over 3. If you multiply 1 times x, 3 times 1, it's x over 3. X over 3, however, can be written as 1/3 times x. What we're going to do then is we're going to subtract the 2 first because it's added there, or it's added really because it's a positive. And that goes away, but what we do on one side we have to do to the other. So we subtract 2. So we have 1/3 x because that didn't change. We didn't do anything with that. We just moved this number here. Equals 4 minus 2, which is 2. Okay, so here's the trick with fractions. What you do you're dividing by 1/3, but that is really uncomfortable or cumbersome. 1/3 divided by 1/3, if you write it out this way, is really 1/3, and you change this to multiplication because that's the procedure for fractions, and then you flip the fraction to 3/1. So when you're dividing by the fraction, you're really multiplying by the inverse. Okay, so we're not going to go through this division. Instead, we're multiplying by the inverse, and that's the fastest and nicest way to when you have a fraction as a coefficient on your letter. You multiply, both sides. You multiply both sides by what's called the multiplicative inverse. Just flip it upside down. And remember, any whole numbers over 1, so when you multiply this by the same, meaning the turned over fraction, you multiply both sides by the flipped fraction. This way, what you have is this cancels out because 3/3 cancels out. So the whole thing is just 1. So 1x becomes just an x. This here is multiplied. 2 times 3 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. 6/1 is just 6. And a lot of students got that right. But that's the trick for dealing with fractions when they're a coefficient. So we'll see it again in the next problem. So here's this problem where we have 5 equals 15 minus 2/3 x. Let's do this again. We're going to move this first. So this is the tricky part. This is added here because there's a positive 15, so we actually subtract the 15 from both sides. So 5 minus 15 then is minus 10. This goes away, and then you have, and this little negative stuff will all balance out in the end. Negative 2/3 x. So again, we're going to divide, because this is the coefficient, we divide both sides by negative 2/3. But we don't have to go through that step. We can multiply by the flip. Okay, as I was just showing in the last problem. So we're going to multiply by negative 3/2. This stuff all cancels out. 3/3, 2/2. You still have a negative. So we're going to have a negative 1x. That's what I do whenever there's a negative x. I call it negative 1x. And that just helps me keep track of my negative better. And we're going to multiply this side as well, because you have to do the same thing. Remember, we're multiplying by the turned upside down fraction, and it is negative. Okay? Remember, this is over 1. So negative 3 times, because we're multiplying, negative 3 times negative 10 is 30. 2 times 1 is 2. This is positive. And you know what? I just realized something. When you multiply negative 2/3, times the negative 3/2, it comes out a positive. It does cancel out. So you'll have a positive 1 here. So that's a positive 1. Because this answer comes out to positive 15. 30 divided by 2 is 15. And 15 then equals x. Guess I'm getting a little tired. Alright, so that's how you work out this problem with that fraction as a coefficient. And this problem I actually worked out on the other video. And it's important that you know how to work through these problems, because these are all very similar to test questions.